Black woman marries a poor janitor. On their wedding day, he reveals a life-changing secret. Have you ever wondered what would happen if the person you trusted most kept a life-changing secret from you? A secret so big it could turn your world upside down on the happiest day of your life. In this story, a woman falls in love with a humble janitor only to discover, on their wedding day, a truth that no one saw coming. What happens next will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an incredible story like this one. Now, let's get started. The hum of the office building was a quiet yet persistent rhythm, a backdrop of ringing phones, clicking keyboards, and muffled conversations. Naomi adjusted her blazer as she stepped off the elevator onto the 25th floor, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors. Another day, another meeting, another chance to prove herself in a world that often doubted her. She smoothed a stray curl back into her sleek bun, her thoughts already racing ahead to the pitch she would deliver in 30 minutes. As she crossed the lobby, something caught her attention. Just ahead, a man knelt on one knee, carefully scooping up papers that had spilled from a battered leather folder. He was dressed in a grey janitor's uniform, the name Daniel embroidered neatly on the patch over his chest. His dark brown hair was slightly disheveled, and his hands moved with a quiet precision, stacking the papers as though they held secrets too precious to wrinkle. Naomi paused for a fraction of a second, her natural instinct to help warring with her schedule. She glanced at her watch, but then sighed and stepped forward. "Let me help you with that," she said, crouching down beside him. Daniel looked up, startled by the offer. His eyes, a warm shade of hazel, met hers, and for a moment the bustling world around them seemed to fade. "Oh no, it's okay," he said quickly, his voice low and even. "I've got it." Naomi ignored his protest and began gathering the scattered papers. As she handed them to him, she noticed the titles on a few pages, technical drawings, diagrams, and a list of equations she couldn't quite follow. "Interesting work for a janitor," she remarked with a teasing smile. Daniel's cheeks flushed, but he smiled back, a small self-deprecating curve of his lips. "Just something I tinker with in my spare time." Naomi raised an eyebrow, intrigued but too polite to pry further. "Well, good luck with your tinkering, and maybe invest in a sturdier folder next time." He chuckled softly. "Noted." She stood and adjusted her blazer again, preparing to walk away. But something about Daniel lingered in her mind. He wasn't like the other staff she usually passed in the building, their faces blurred into the routine of her busy life. There was a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself, a sharpness in his gaze that hinted at a story untold. As Naomi entered the conference room, her thoughts briefly wandered back to the janitor with the mysterious folder. Who was he? Why did his calm presence leave such an impression? Later that evening, as she walked toward the parking garage, Naomi spotted Daniel again. This time, he was mopping the floor in the corner of the lobby. He worked methodically, his movements steady and deliberate, almost as if he found solace in the task. She slowed her pace, watching him for a moment longer than she intended. He must have sensed her gaze, because he looked up, and their eyes met once again. Naomi felt an unexpected flutter in her chest, a soft but insistent whisper that she couldn't quite explain. "Long day?" she asked, breaking the silence. Daniel leaned on the mop handle, offering a tired but genuine smile. "Always. But someone's got to keep this place shining." "You do a good job of it," she said, surprised at how easily the compliment slipped from her lips. "I'm Naomi, by the way." "Daniel," he replied, his smile widening slightly. "Nice to meet you, Naomi." "Well, Daniel, have a good night," she said, her tone lighter than usual. As she walked away, Naomi couldn't help but glance over her shoulder. Daniel had returned to his work, but the faint smile on his face remained. For reasons she didn't fully understand, Naomi drove home that night with a sense of lightness she hadn't felt in years. The janitor, with the kind eyes and mysterious folder, was a puzzle, and puzzles, as she had always believed, were meant to be solved. That night, as she sat in her quiet apartment, Naomi's mind wandered back to Daniel. It wasn't just his kindness or the way he carried himself. It was something unspoken, something in the way he seemed to belong, yet remain apart from the world around him. She shook her head, laughing softly to herself. "You're imagining things," she murmured, closing her laptop after half-heartedly working on tomorrow's presentation. But even as she slipped under the covers and closed her eyes, Daniel's hazel gaze lingered in her thoughts, sparking questions she couldn't yet answer. The days following her brief encounters with Daniel unfolded in the usual way for Naomi: meetings, deadlines, and the endless balancing act of career ambitions and personal well-being. Yet, despite the humdrum routine, her thoughts often wandered back to him. She found herself scanning the building's lobby on her way in or out, half hoping to spot him again. It was silly, she thought, but she couldn't deny the quiet intrigue he had stirred. Her chance came a week later. Naomi stood in line at the coffee cart, tucked into the corner of the lobby, scrolling through her phone while waiting for her turn. She ordered her usual a double-shot latte and stepped aside to wait for it to be prepared. As she glanced up, there he was, standing a few feet away, holding a steaming cup of black coffee. "Fancy meeting you here?" Naomi said, a smile pulling at her lips before she could stop it. Daniel turned, startled but quick to recover. "Naomi," he said, his tone warm with recognition. "Coffee break. Something like that. Though I think survival fuel is more accurate." He chuckled softly. "I get that. I think half this building runs on caffeine." She tilted her head, studying him for a moment. "Do you ever sit down and enjoy it? Or is it always on the go?" Daniel glanced at his cup, as if considering her question more deeply than she'd intended. "Mostly on the go," he admitted, "but maybe I should change that. Maybe you should." She paused, then added, "How about right now? Join me?" The invitation surprised even her. Naomi wasn't in the habit of sharing coffee breaks with strangers, but something about Daniel made her want to linger. He hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face, but then he nodded. "Sure, why not?" They found a quiet corner near the large glass windows overlooking the street. The city buzzed outside, cars honking and people rushing by, but inside the atmosphere was calm. Naomi stirred her latte absently, watching the foam swirl into patterns. "So," she began, "do you always carry around folders full of mysterious blueprints? Or was that a one-time thing?" Daniel smiled, a little sheepishly. "You noticed that, huh? Kind of hard not to. They looked complicated." "They are," he admitted. "It's a hobby. I like designing things machines mostly. Keeps my mind busy." "Machines?" Naomi leaned forward, intrigued. "Like what?" "Little things," he said, his tone modest. "Tools, gadgets. Sometimes I think of ways to improve the ones we already use. It's nothing big." She frowned, sensing he was holding back. "You're underselling yourself." Daniel shrugged, but there was a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Maybe, or maybe I just don't want to bore you." "You're not boring me," Naomi said earnestly. "In fact, I think it's pretty fascinating." Her sincerity seemed to catch him off guard. He looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to trust her with more, but before he could speak, a loud voice called out from across the lobby, "Hey, Daniel, we need you in the loading dock." He turned toward the sound, his expression slipping into something more reserved. "Duty calls," he said, standing. "Thanks for the coffee break." "Any time," Naomi replied, watching as he walked away. That evening, as she sat in her car in the parking garage, Naomi replayed their conversation in her mind. She realized how little she actually knew about Daniel, yet she felt drawn to him in a way she couldn't quite explain. He was more than a janitor, she was sure of that. But what exactly lay beneath his quiet exterior? And why did he seem so hesitant to let anyone in? Their paths crossed more often after that day. A shared elevator ride here, a quick chat in the lobby there. Each interaction was like peeling back a layer, revealing small glimpses of who Daniel was. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, making her laugh in a way she hadn't in a long time. He listened when she spoke, really listened, and his responses were thoughtful, as if he cared about more than just polite conversation. Naomi began to notice little details about him, the way he rolled up his sleeves when he worked, the faint crease that appeared between his brows when he was deep in thought. He was always busy, always moving, yet he carried himself with an ease that belied the hard work he put into his job. One evening, as she left the office late, she found him in the lobby, carefully cleaning a stubborn smudge from the glass doors. The sight stopped her in her tracks. It was such a simple, unremarkable moment, yet there was something profoundly human about it, something that made her heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. "Still here?" she asked, her voice breaking the quiet. Daniel looked up, surprised but smiling when he saw her. "Yeah, long day? Long week," she admitted, stepping closer. "What about you? Just finishing up?" He straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You? Trying to figure out why I spend so much time at a job that doesn't love me back," she said with a wry smile. Daniel chuckled softly. "Maybe you should find one that does." His words, simple as they were, struck a chord. Naomi found herself nodding. "Maybe I should." They stood there for a moment, the hum of the building around them fading into the background. For the first time in a long time, Naomi felt at ease, not as the ambitious professional she was supposed to be, but simply as herself. And as she looked at Daniel, she wondered if he felt the same. Little did she know, Daniel's quiet exterior hid more than just blueprints and modest dreams. It hid a secret that could change everything. The days turned into weeks, and what began as casual conversations between Naomi and Daniel deepened into an unspoken bond. They found reasons to linger after their paths crossed. Coffee breaks stretched longer, and their talks moved beyond small pleasantries to discussions of life, dreams, and the weight they each carried in their own ways. Naomi didn't understand why she felt so drawn to Daniel. He wasn't like the men she usually dated, polished, ambitious professionals with lofty titles and sharp suits. Yet Daniel had a depth to him, a quiet strength that made her feel safe. He made her laugh, challenged her thinking, and most importantly, he listened to her, not as a corporate executive, but as Naomi, a woman trying to navigate the world. It was a crisp evening when Naomi found herself standing outside her office building, waiting for a car service to pick her up after a late meeting. The street was quieter than usual, and the cold air nipped at her cheeks. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself, shivering slightly. "Need some company?" Daniel's voice broke the silence, warm and familiar. Naomi turned to see him approaching, a faint smile on his face. He carried a small toolbox, his uniform slightly rumpled after what must have been a long shift. "Always," she replied with a grin. "What are you still doing here?" "Fixing a busted elevator on the east side. Thought I'd call it a night, but then I saw you standing here looking cold." Naomi laughed softly. "Well, I appreciate the moral support." Daniel leaned against a nearby lamppost, his hands in his pockets. "Busy day." "Exhausting," she admitted. "Some days I wonder why I push myself so hard. It's like no matter how much I achieve, it's never enough." Daniel tilted his head, studying her. "Enough for who?" The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to respond, but found she didn't have an answer, not an honest one at least. She shrugged, her breath fogging in the cool air. "I don't know. Maybe everyone." "You don't have to be enough for everyone," Daniel said quietly. "Just for yourself." His words lingered in the air between them, a truth so simple yet so hard to accept. Naomi felt a knot in her chest loosen slightly. She glanced at him, wondering how someone who seemed so grounded could still feel so enigmatic. "Why do you care so much about other people?" she asked suddenly, surprising even herself with the question. "You're always helping. Always kind. Where does that come from?" Daniel hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I guess I know what it's like to not have anyone," he said after a moment. "And I don't want anyone else to feel that way." Naomi's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. She wanted to press further, to understand him more, but before she could, her car arrived. "I'll see you tomorrow," she asked, reluctant to leave. Daniel nodded, his smile faint but genuine. "Count on it." The next day, Naomi was determined to learn more about him. Their conversations had made her realize how little she truly knew about Daniel beyond his quiet charm and unassuming demeanor. What was he hiding, and why did he seem so reluctant to let anyone in? She found her opportunity during lunch. Naomi had spotted Daniel sitting alone in the building's small break room, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. She walked in with purpose, holding 2 sandwiches in her hands. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from him before he could respond. Daniel raised an eyebrow, but smiled. "Not at all. I brought you this," Naomi said, handing him one of the sandwiches. "Figured you might need something more substantial than coffee." He chuckled softly, taking the sandwich. "Thanks, you didn't have to." "I wanted to," she replied, unwrapping her own lunch. "So, tell me something about yourself. Something I don't already know." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as if weighing her request. "What do you want to know? Anything. Your favorite movie. What you like to do on weekends. Why you decided to work here." She paused, then added with a teasing smile, "Or what's really in that folder of blueprints you're always carrying around." He laughed, the sound low and warm. "You don't give up, do you?" "Not when I'm curious." Daniel took a bite of his sandwich, his expression thoughtful. "Okay," he said after a moment. "You want to know about the blueprints? They're designs I've been working on for years. Machines, tools, things I think could make life easier for people." Naomi's eyes lit up. "That's incredible. Have you ever shown them to anyone? Tried to get them made?" Daniel hesitated, his smile fading slightly. "Not really. It's just a hobby." "A hobby?" she repeated, incredulous. "Daniel, this sounds like more than a hobby. Why don't you do something with it?" He shrugged, his gaze dropping to the table. "I guess I'm not sure anyone would care." Naomi frowned, her heart sinking at his words. "I care," she said softly, "and I think anyone who sees your work would care too." Their eyes met, and for a moment Naomi saw something raw and unguarded in Daniel's expression, something that made her want to reach across the table and take his hand. But just as quickly he looked away, his walls sliding back into place. "Thanks, Naomi," he said, his voice quiet. "That means a lot." Later that evening, as Naomi reflected on their conversation, she couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel was holding back. There was more to his story, more to the blueprints, more to the way he carried himself with such quiet humility. She didn't know what it was, but she was determined to find out. Little did she know, Daniel's secret wasn't just about his blueprints or his dreams. It was a truth he had buried for years, a truth he feared would change everything if it ever came to light. And as much as he wanted to trust Naomi, the weight of his past made it impossible to let her in, at least not yet. Naomi couldn't let go of the nagging feeling that Daniel's story was more intricate than he let on. Days turned into weeks, and their friendship continued to grow, each conversation peeling back another thin layer of his guarded demeanor. But no matter how much progress they made, there was always a part of him that stayed just out of reach. It was a quiet Friday evening when the opportunity for a deeper connection finally arrived. Naomi had stayed late at work, going over a report for an upcoming presentation. By the time she stepped into the lobby, the building was almost empty, the usual hustle replaced by a serene stillness. She was about to head to the parking lot when she saw Daniel. He was seated on a bench near the maintenance closet, his elbows resting on his knees and his head bowed. The sight stopped her mid-step. Gone was the easy smile and the calm confidence she had come to know. In their place was something raw, almost broken. "Daniel?" she called softly. He looked up, startled, and quickly straightened. "Naomi," he said, his voice attempting cheerfulness, though it fell short. "What are you still doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing." She walked closer, her heels clicking softly on the tiled floor. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, just tired." He stood, as if to leave, but Naomi wasn't convinced. There was something in his eyes, a shadow she hadn't seen before. "You don't look okay," she said gently, placing a hand on his arm. "Talk to me." Daniel hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. For a moment, she thought he might brush her off, but then he sighed and sat back down. Naomi followed, sitting beside him on the bench. "I don't usually do this," he said after a long pause. "Talk about personal stuff." "You don't have to," Naomi replied, though her tone invited him to continue. He ran a hand through his hair, the weariness evident in his posture. "Do you ever feel like you're living two lives?" he asked, his voice low. "Like there's the version of you that people see, and then there's the real you, buried so deep you're not sure anyone would understand." Naomi nodded slowly, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his words. "I think everyone feels that way sometimes," she said. "But I don't think it's about hiding who you are. It's about finding the right person to share it with." Daniel looked at her then, his hazel eyes searching hers, as if trying to decide if she was that person. "It's complicated," he said finally. "I've got time," Naomi replied, offering him a small, encouraging smile. The story Daniel shared was fragmented, as if he were testing the waters before diving into the full truth. He told her about growing up in a family where expectations were rigid and success was measured in dollar signs. He spoke of a father who valued wealth above all else, and a childhood spent learning that love and approval came with conditions. "I walked away from it all," he said, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of pain. "The money, the family name, everything. I couldn't be the person they wanted me to be." Naomi listened intently, her hand resting lightly on the bench between them. "That must have been hard," she said softly. "It was," Daniel admitted, "but it was the right choice. I couldn't live with myself if I stayed." "Is that why you became a janitor?" she asked, careful not to let her curiosity come across as judgment. He nodded. "I needed something simple, something honest. The work might not be glamorous, but it's mine. No strings attached." Naomi felt a swell of admiration for him, but also a pang of sadness. "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. "Not the decision itself, but sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if things were different, if I could have had both a clean conscience and a family that accepted me." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotions. Naomi wanted to say something comforting, but she sensed that what Daniel needed most in that moment wasn't advice, it was simply someone to listen. As they sat there, the silence between them grew companionable, the kind of quiet that didn't need to be filled. Naomi glanced at him out of the corner of her eye, noticing the way his shoulders had relaxed slightly, as if sharing even a small part of his burden had lifted some of its weight. "Thank you," Daniel said suddenly, breaking the silence. "For what?" "For listening," he replied, his gaze meeting hers. "Most people don't." Naomi smiled, her heart swelling with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Well, I'm not most people." "No," Daniel said, his voice soft but firm. "You're not." The following day, Naomi couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. She found herself wondering how someone as kind and thoughtful as Daniel could have been cast out by his own family. The more she learned about him, the more she admired his strength. But she also couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more he wasn't telling her. On Sunday, she decided to take a chance. She texted him, inviting him to lunch at a small cafe near her apartment. To her relief, he agreed. When they met, Daniel seemed more at ease than he had the night before. They talked about lighter topics, favorite books, movies, and the best pizza spots in the city. But even as they laughed and joked, Naomi could feel the undercurrent of something deeper between them, an unspoken connection that seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. As they finished their meal, Naomi leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "You know," she said, her tone playful, "you're a bit of a mystery, Daniel." He raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" "Definitely, but I'm starting to think I like mysteries." Daniel smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "Careful, Naomi. You might not like what you find." "I'm willing to take that risk," she said, her voice steady. For the first time since they'd met, Daniel looked at her with something like hope. a tentative, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to carry his secrets alone anymore. Naomi's connection with Daniel deepened with each shared moment, each conversation that felt more like a thread weaving them closer together. Yet despite the warmth and ease between them, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel still held a piece of himself back, a piece locked away behind walls he wasn't ready to lower. It was on a rainy Wednesday evening, nearly 2 weeks after their heartfelt lunch, that Naomi's intuition proved right. She had stayed late at the office, poring over figures for an upcoming budget meeting. By the time she packed up and headed to the lobby, the storm outside had grown fierce, lightning cracking through the sky and rain pounding against the building's glass windows. As Naomi stepped into the lobby, she spotted Daniel standing near the entrance, staring out at the storm. He didn't notice her at first, his posture tense and his face drawn. She had never seen him look so unsettled. "Daniel," she called softly. He turned abruptly, his eyes wide for a moment, before recognition softened his features. "Naomi, you're still here." "Just finished up," she said, stepping closer. "You okay?" Daniel's gaze shifted back to the rain. "Yeah," he said, though the tightness in his voice told another story. "Just thinking about," she prompted, folding her arms and leaning against the wall beside him. For a moment she thought he might brush her off, but then he sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Sometimes storms remind me of things I'd rather forget." Naomi frowned, her concern deepening. "What kind of things?" Daniel hesitated, his jaw tightening as if he were waging an internal battle. "Naomi," he said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I probably should have told you a long time ago." Her heart skipped a beat. She searched his face, seeing the turmoil there, the vulnerability, the fear. "Whatever it is, you can tell me," she said gently. "I'm not going anywhere." He nodded slowly, but instead of speaking, he gestured toward the small seating area in the lobby. "Let's sit." As they settled into the chairs, Daniel clasped his hands together, staring down at them as if searching for the right words. Naomi waited patiently, sensing how difficult this was for him. "I haven't been entirely honest with you," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "About who I am, about my past." Naomi leaned forward slightly, her heart pounding in her chest. "Okay," she said, keeping her tone calm and steady. "I'm listening." Daniel took a deep breath, his gaze finally meeting hers. "I wasn't always a janitor," he said. "Before this, before everything, I was part of something much bigger. My family, they're wealthy, old money, the kind that controls more than anyone realizes. And for most of my life, I was expected to follow in their footsteps." Naomi blinked, his confession sinking in. She had suspected there was more to him, but this was far beyond what she had imagined. "What happened?" she asked softly. "I walked away," Daniel said, his voice filled with a mix of regret and resolve. "I couldn't do it anymore, the lying, the corruption, the way they treated people like commodities. I tried to fight it at first, but it became clear that nothing was going to change, so I left. I gave up the money, the privileges, everything." He paused, his hands tightening into fists. "But it wasn't just about leaving. My family, they saw it as a betrayal. They cut me off completely, made sure I had no way back. And honestly, I didn't want one. I wanted to start over, to live a life that felt honest. That's how I ended up here." Naomi's mind raced, trying to piece together the man she had come to know with the image he was painting of his former life. "That must have been incredibly difficult," she said, her voice filled with empathy. "To leave everything behind like that." "It was," Daniel admitted. "But it was also freeing. For the first time, I felt like I could be myself, without all the expectations and strings. The only problem is—" He trailed off, his gaze dropping again. "The only problem is what?" Naomi pressed gently. "The problem is that I'm still running," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I've built this whole life around staying under the radar, avoiding anything that might tie me back to them. And now, with you, I don't know how to stop." Naomi's heart ached at the pain in his words. She reached across the small table and placed her hand over his, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You don't have to run anymore, Daniel," she said softly. "Not with me." He looked up, his eyes searching hers for something hope, perhaps, or reassurance. "I was so afraid of losing you," he admitted, "that if you knew the truth, you'd think I was just some spoiled rich kid playing at being humble." Naomi shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "Daniel, you're the furthest thing from that. You're one of the kindest, most genuine people I've ever met. And if anything, knowing what you've been through makes me admire you even more." For a moment, Daniel simply stared at her, his expression a mix of disbelief and relief. Then, slowly, his shoulders relaxed and a faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "You really mean that?" "Every word," Naomi said firmly. They sat in silence for a while, the storm outside raging on as they found a quiet peace between them. Naomi could feel the shift in their dynamic, the walls Daniel had carefully built beginning to crumble. She knew this was just the beginning, that there were still pieces of his story left to uncover. But for now, she was content to be there for him, to let him know he didn't have to face it all alone. As they parted ways that night, Naomi felt a renewed sense of purpose. Daniel had let her into a part of his world he had kept hidden for so long, and she was determined to show him that he was safe with her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they could face them together. The days following Daniel's revelation were filled with a fragile but growing closeness between him and Naomi. His confession had cracked open the walls he had spent years building, and for the first time, Naomi felt she was seeing Daniel as he truly was, not just a man defined by his humility and kindness, but someone who had faced the world's sharp edges and chosen to live with integrity. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Naomi invited Daniel over to her apartment for breakfast. The air was fragrant with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and cinnamon, and sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a warm glow over her cozy living room. Daniel stood at the counter, watching Naomi whisk eggs in a ceramic bowl. He seemed more relaxed than she'd seen him in weeks, his usual guarded demeanor softened by the comfort of her home. "This is a first," he said with a playful grin. "Breakfast at someone else's place. I usually stick to toast and instant coffee." Naomi glanced over her shoulder, arching an eyebrow. "Instant coffee? Daniel, that's almost criminal." He chuckled. "What can I say? I like to keep things simple." "Simple is one thing," she teased, "but bad coffee, that's just unacceptable." As she turned back to the stove, Naomi felt Daniel's gaze linger on her, and her cheeks warmed under the intensity of his attention. She focused on flipping the omelette, pretending not to notice, though her heart raced with every passing moment. When the food was ready, they sat across from each other at her small dining table. The meal was unpretentious omelettes, toast and fruit, but it felt intimate in a way neither of them had expected. They talked about everything and nothing, their laughter filling the space like music. It wasn't until they were finishing their second cups of coffee that the conversation turned serious. "You said your family cut you off," Naomi began, her tone gentle. "Have you ever thought about reconnecting with them?" Daniel's smile faded, and he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I've thought about it," he admitted. "But I don't think it's possible. My father, he doesn't forgive easily. To him, walking away was the ultimate betrayal." "What about the rest of your family?" Naomi asked. "Your siblings?" Daniel hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I have a brother," he said slowly. "He's the golden child, the one who stayed, who did everything our father wanted. We were close when we were younger, but I don't think he'd want anything to do with me now." Naomi reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "You don't know that for sure." "Maybe not," Daniel said, his voice heavy. "But even if I did reach out, what would I say? Hey, I know I left without a word and threw away everything we were raised to value, but let's grab a coffee sometime? It's not that simple." Naomi's heart ached at the pain in his words, the weight of his estrangement evident in every syllable. She wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the burden he carried, but she knew this wasn't a wound that could be healed with words alone. "You don't have to figure it out all at once," she said softly. "But maybe one day you'll feel ready, and if that day comes, you won't have to do it alone." Daniel looked at her then, his hazel eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Why are you so good to me?" he asked quietly. Naomi smiled, her heart swelling. "Because you deserve it." After Daniel left, Naomi found herself reflecting on their conversation. His story weighed on her mind, the details he'd shared piecing together a clearer picture of the man she was falling for. But even as she admired his strength, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness at how much he had sacrificed to live a life of integrity. Later that night, as she curled up on her couch with a cup of tea, her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. "Daniel, thanks for today. I don't remember the last time I felt this at peace." Naomi smiled, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she typed her response. "Naomi, you're welcome. Anytime you need peace or just good coffee, you know where to find me." She stared at the screen for a moment, then added another line before hitting send. "Naomi, you're not alone anymore, Daniel. I hope you know that." The bond between Naomi and Daniel grew stronger. They spent more time together, sharing meals, taking walks, and having long conversations that stretched late into the night. Each moment felt like a step closer to something profound, something neither of them had fully acknowledged, but both felt deeply. But even as their relationship deepened, Naomi couldn't ignore the lingering sense that Daniel was still holding something back. His honesty about his past had brought them closer, but she sensed there was another layer, a truth he hadn't yet shared. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the city skyline, Naomi decided to confront him gently. "You've been quiet tonight," she said, nudging his shoulder playfully. "What's on your mind?" Daniel hesitated, his gaze fixed on the distant lights. "There's something else I haven't told you," he admitted, his voice barely audible. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. "Okay," she said, keeping her tone steady. "I'm listening." He took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the bench. "When I left my family, it wasn't just about walking away from their lifestyle. It was about walking away from the person I used to be. I wasn't always this guy, the one who tries to do the right thing, who works hard and keeps his head down. There were times when I was selfish, entitled, and reckless. And sometimes I wonder if that part of me is still there, waiting to come back." Naomi placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "Daniel, everyone has parts of themselves they're not proud of. What matters is who you choose to be now. And the man I see, the man I've come to care about, he's nothing like the person you're describing." Daniel turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. "You really believe that?" "I do," Naomi said firmly. "But the question is, do you?" He was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'm trying to." "That's all anyone can do," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "And you don't have to do it alone." As the city lights twinkled around them, Daniel felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could let go of the shadows of his past and embrace the light Naomi had brought into his life. And for the first time in years, he began to believe that he was worthy of the love and trust she offered so freely. Months passed, and Naomi and Daniel's relationship blossomed into a love neither had anticipated. Their bond, forged through vulnerability and trust, became a foundation strong enough to hold their dreams, fears, and everything in between. When Daniel proposed one quiet evening under a blanket of stars, Naomi said yes without hesitation. The wedding day arrived, bathed in the soft glow of a spring morning. Friends and family gathered in a small sunlit garden adorned with wildflowers. The setting was intimate, just as they had wanted a celebration, not of grandeur, but of the love they had built together. Daniel stood at the altar, his nerves hidden behind a calm exterior. But inside, his heart raced. The secret he had carried for years, the one even Naomi didn't fully know, pressed heavily on his chest. He had convinced himself it didn't matter, that the man he had become was all that counted. But now, as he waited for Naomi to walk down the aisle, he couldn't ignore the fear that she might see him differently once she knew. Then, the music began, and Naomi appeared. She was radiant, her simple white dress flowing like water as she walked toward him, her smile bright and unwavering. As their eyes met, Daniel felt the weight on his heart lift ever so slightly. For this moment, at least, everything was perfect. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with heartfelt vows and quiet laughter. When Daniel slipped the ring onto Naomi's finger, he whispered, "You've made me whole," and the truth of it shimmered in his eyes. But as the celebration unfolded, Daniel knew he couldn't carry his secret any longer. He owed Naomi the full truth, even if it risked shattering the happiness they had found. As the reception wound down and the guests began to leave, Daniel pulled Naomi aside to a quiet corner of the garden. The lanterns overhead cast a warm glow on her face, and she looked at him with curiosity and love. "Naomi," he began, his voice unsteady, "there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you long ago." She frowned slightly, concern flickering in her eyes. "What is it?" He took her hands in his, the warmth of her touch grounding him. "You know about my family, the wealth, the power, all of that. But what I didn't tell you is, I still have access to it, all of it." Naomi blinked, her lips parting in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I walked away, yes," Daniel explained, "but I didn't sever every tie. I couldn't. My father left a trust in my name, one I never touched. I didn't want it to define me, but it's there, and it's substantial." Naomi stared at him, her expression unreadable. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to think I was hiding behind it," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "I wanted you to love me for who I am now, not for what I come from. But I realize now that hiding it wasn't fair to you. You deserve to know everything." For a long moment, Naomi said nothing. Daniel's chest tightened, fear creeping in. But then she reached up and cupped his face, her touch gentle. "I don't care about the money, Daniel," she said softly. "I care about you. The man who walked away from everything because he wanted to live with integrity. The man who works hard, who loves deeply, and who always puts others first." Tears filled Daniel's eyes, and he let out a shaky breath. "I was so scared you'd see me differently." Naomi smiled, her own eyes glistening. "I do see you differently, but not because of the money. Because you trusted me enough to share this part of yourself. And that means more to me than anything." The weeks following the wedding were filled with a renewed sense of hope and possibility. Together, Naomi and Daniel decided how to approach his hidden wealth. They chose to use it not for luxury, but for purpose, investing in causes that aligned with their values and helping those in need. They started small, funding scholarships for underprivileged students and supporting local community programs. As word of their generosity spread, so did their impact, and Daniel found himself reconnecting with the parts of his past he thought he had left behind. One day, Naomi encouraged Daniel to reach out to his brother. It wasn't easy. Old wounds and pride made the conversation tense at first, but over time, the brothers began to rebuild their bond, finding common ground in their shared history and a newfound respect for each other's choices. Years later, as Daniel and Naomi stood on the porch of their modest but welcoming home, they looked out at the life they had built together. Their love had grown stronger with each passing year, weathering challenges and embracing joys. Children's laughter echoed from the yard where their two young sons played with a group of neighborhood kids. Nearby, a plaque on the community center bore their names, a testament to their commitment to giving back. Daniel wrapped an arm around Naomi, pulling her close. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Every day," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "And I wouldn't change a thing." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Daniel and Naomi stood together, their hearts full of gratitude. Their story was one of love, forgiveness, and growth, a reminder that even the heaviest secrets could be overcome with trust, and that true wealth lay not in what they had, but in the life they shared. And so, their story reminds us that love isn't about perfection, it's about trust, forgiveness, and building a life together, no matter the challenges. If you were inspired by their journey, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.